Today we will look at a qualitative exploration of perspectives of students of color at predominantly white institutions. My name is Marc Bady, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. The background of this study relies on relevant, scholarly peer-reviewed articles and books based on cultural competencies, cultural intelligence, which is a subcategory of cultural competencies, organizational commitment by Meyer and Allen, as well as the subject of diversity, inclusion, and equity. When we look at the statement of the problem, we look at three different categories that the problem is built on: the idea, the reality, and the consequence. When we look at the idea, we want to understand that the organizations such as colleges and universities, specifically predominantly white institutions, would retain more students of color because these organizations and their stakeholders have cultural competence. Programs such as mentorship could be a specific method to address this. In turn, the students of color would attend high levels or attain high levels of organizational commitment. The reality is that according to resources and scholars, educational environments that are predominantly white are not always perceived as safe spaces for people of color and lack diverse perspectives that help retain students of color. The consequence is that a loss of cultural competence will have a negative impact on the PWI itself, retention, in addition to those attending PWIs having a diverse perspective to enter the job market in a complex and global world. There are three research objectives. The first being about demographics, and the second is looking at to explore the enablers that are perceived by students of color concerning cultural competencies at PWIs. The third and final research objective is looking to explore the barriers as perceived by students of color concerning the cultural competencies at PWIs. The purpose and the significance of the study. When we look at the purpose of the purpose of this qualitative study is to explore and understand the experiences of students of color at a PWI as they relate to cultural competencies and the impact on the organizational commitment. With the significance of the study, we believe that this study could provide insight to college administrators and predominantly white institutions regarding experiences and gaps in understanding concerning cultural competencies and factors that influence students of color to commit to that organization. When we look at the conceptual framework, we look at the first research objective in the box on the top left that says students of color in predominantly white institutions. That then feeds to the next two research objectives, which focuses on the enablers and the barriers. That's built in the context around diversity and inclusion, cultural competency, and organizational commitment, which then lead to that prize of retention. And it's built on theoretical foundations of trust theory and empowerment theory. We look at the limitations, delimitations, and assumptions of this particular study. While not going over all of those for you, I will go over the ones that are highlighted and stand out the most. With the limitation, we look at how some students may not have the best understanding of their own identity. For example, those who identify as biracial may not have the best understanding, or maybe just looking into the development of their identity. They may identify, say for instance, as white if their mother is white and if their father is black. They may identify as the opposite. So that could be one particular limitation of the study as we look at participants. When we look at delimitations, one of the delimitations that stands out is that this study does not focus on, or nor did I choose to focus this study on gender. As we know, there are non-binary folks, there are males and females, or folks who identify as those, and we did not focus specifically on gender. And with the assumption, one of the assumptions that again stands out is that the participants will be sincere and authentic in their responses. As we look at the literature review, think of this literature review as a funnel. We start with the largest theme and the largest pocket of information, which is involved in diversity and inclusion. From that diversity and inclusion, we look at several points that looks at the psychosocial and cognitive development, Black identity, racial and ethnic identity, and then we look at mentoring from a diversity perspective. We then look at the next part of the funnel, which is the cultural competency, which is getting more specific to the subcategories of intelligence, and then it brings in our theories such as empowerment, trust, and human capital development. And finally, we look at the smallest piece of the puzzle, which is just as significant, which is the organizational commitment. When looking at the research design, we are looking at a phenomenological approach where this qualitative approach will look at unstructured one on one interviews, hopefully over Zoom or Google Hangouts in this particular climate instead of in person. And our participants will be hopefully African American, male, female, or non binary, students of color at PWIs. We'll use the snowball sampling effect as well. And the questions in these unstructured interviews will be open ended, of course. With the data collection plan, you'll see a 12-week plan that starts with the initiative to reach out and get the IRB approval for the study. We then go into the communication where we enact that snowball effect, which talks a little bit about the unstructured interviews as well. And then we approach the nitty gritty of the interviews, which includes recording them, having them transcript, reviewing the transcripts, sending the transcripts to the participant, and then doing the coding as well. And then we end this process with contacting participants with their gift cards for their participation. And finally, when we look at our data analysis plan, we have 3 research objectives again. And that first research objective is simply going to be a descriptive statistics data analysis, where we look at nominal and ordinal information to make that analysis. And then for the final 2, which looks at both the enablers and the barriers, we will look at recurring themes and content analysis for the data analysis plan. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and any feedback you have would be very, very welcome as I continue this journey.